the request.
Hi, how you doing, man?
Good, how you doing, Rob?
Hey,
Hello.
Lisa, how you doing?
That is perfect timing. We just went live. Welcome, Rob. Good to see you.
Glad to be here.
Good evening. I'd like to call the October 26, 2020 Henrietta Town Board Workshop Meeting to order. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Barley,
Here.
Councilmember Stafford,
Here.
Councilmember Safranek,
Here.
Councilmember Bolsner,
Here.
Supervisor Schultz.
Here. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So there are no special use permits on the docket this week. So the meeting will begin at 7 o'clock. We'll start with a presentation on the 2021 tentative budget. And then there'll be two public hearings. One is a continuation on Riverton Parcel E. My plan is to give an update on where we're at with that one, and then actually close the public hearing. It doesn't mean we're all done and ready to decide. It basically means that they still have a number of items that they have to get to us. So rather than keep this open and require residents to be paying attention every single week, we're going to close it. When we get all the necessary documents back from them and all the necessary material from them, we'll then do a call for a public hearing and reopen it.
Sounds good.
And then we have the public hearing that we called at the last meeting on the proposed local law to allow the town board to set longer durations for large project building permits. I just want to, where is the, I know we've got the presentation. Am I just missing it? What item number is the tentative budget? The resolution?
7, is it?
No.
Yes, it's 7.
7. It is 7. Okay. Since we just talked about it now, I'll talk about it a little bit out of order. Because again, so one of the things, basically now that we have presented you with the tentative budget, we folded in some of the stuff from the departmental meetings from a week or two ago. Now that it's been presented as a tentative budget, it basically means it's locked other than through town board resolution. So when we call for the public hearing, we'll have the presentation on the tentative budget. If you guys between now and when we call for the public hearing, if there are any changes you'd like to see made to the budget, we would basically, as we're considering the resolution for number 7, so the last, there, in addition to calling for the public hearing, there's a therefore be it resolved clause that basically says, the tentative budget is being modified with the following changes, and that's essentially to then become the preliminary budget. So what we'll do is if there are changes, we'll do them as amendments to the resolution. So that way each one's voted on separately.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a couple related ones and you want to group them together, we would just vote on those changes at once. But the point is that way they're all in the resolution as the changes per this town board. If we decide there's no changes, then we will just amend the resolution to say none. But that way we have a clear record, legislative record as to the changes that were made to go from tentative to preliminary. And then obviously the following meeting, one thing to keep in mind, we only have the one meeting in November. So the plan is to basically have the hearing and approve the budget at the November meeting. And again, even, if there's feedback from residents that cause us to want to change something to the preliminary budget, again, it has to be done through town board resolution. So we would pretty much follow the same process by where we would have a resolution to make modifications prior to adopting the final budget. So you should have a packet on all
Yes, we do.
the budget stuff. So again, we're going to be going over this in detail tomorrow. We've got a presentation that the director of finance will put on, and well, her and myself. And then, like I said, we'll go through this. So little light reading between now and Wednesday.
Okay.
And we should be good to go to get our budget set up. The key highlight is for the second year in a row, we should be holding the tax levy flat.
That's great.
Because of the growth in the town, both real growth of about 3.9% and the reassessment, the growth in the total tax levy due to reassessment, the tax rate is going to go down significantly. In addition to the tax from that's basically the tax from the standard town tax rate. In addition, because of savings we've been able to make and the size of our contingency funds, we were able to lower the tax rates for both the sewer charges, residential sewer charges, as well as the residential drainage. I think that I'm saying residential. We report the number on the residential. The stuff impacts everybody, but.
Hey, Steve, this is Linda Salpini, Director of Finance. It's the sewer rental charge that goes on to everyone's bill, whether they be residential or not. And then the drainage is kind of the same. It's considered the town's consolidated drainage rate.
Right. The savings, the differences in the commercial properties, they don't pay a flat rent. It's based off of water consumed, if I remember correctly. But the point is the percent savings is the same. Just if we talk about it as it's going to save you $1.50, that's the residential rent. We have a flat rate rent for residential properties and a consumption rent for commercial properties. Is my recollection of and it's not even always necessarily on water consumed. So for instance, Oregon Freeze Dried, who generates a whole lot of wastewater, way more than they consume, not necessarily right now while they're currently furloughed, but when they're in operation, we do it based off of the metered output. Normally, since water in is water out, we do it off of the water meter coming in. But for, like I said, for special circumstances like Oregon Freeze Dried, we meter the outflow. In addition, if it was like a bottling plant for water bottling plant, same thing. They'd want to have us meter the outflow because obviously their inflow would be a lot higher since most of the water they're using is going into their product and not down the waste stack. So, but like I said, that's the general difference between how the residential and commercial are dealt with. So, since most of the people paying attention and wanting to know those numbers are residences, that's why I usually give the resident number. Any questions, anything that you guys think you'll need besides what we've got here?
Has the information from the sheriff's pilot came in? Any information from that?
No, I don't. It won't be in for this Wednesday. I mean, they've started to compile the numbers, but no, we don't have any of the results. But that should be in there before the November. So again, I think the in or out decision will be not necessarily in the, with the preliminary budget, but when we go to final.
Okay.
So they did say that they were receiving, the only feedback I've gotten is that there was a lot of positive response when they were there. The top priority duty that we put on it was ticketing people who were running school crossings and ignoring school crossing guards. They said that there was positive results from that, although I have not dug into what that means. I did hear good things coming back from our crossing guards.
We had kind of a brief discussion about placement of the crossing guards, that I think, several of us have heard some feedback from community members about certain other locations. Is there any way that we could take a look at any other locations for crossing guards?
We have, most of the locations that I've heard requests are for locations on state roads, and the state is the ultimate decision maker on that. The two requests on West Henrietta Road were flat out denied by the state. So one at Martin Road and one at, I think it was Telephone Road was the other one. They basically said that there's no traffic control devices there. There's no stripe. They think that those locations would be a dangerous location for a school crossing due to the nature of the traffic. I don't know what type of appeal process we have. I don't remember. I thought there was a third location with someone. Would you remember? By any
I had
chance?
mentioned outside of Roth, it's on East Henrietta.
On East Henrietta, I haven't heard back on that one, although again, that's also a state road. So
Yeah, there is a traffic.
there is a
control
traffic control device, so that one is slightly different. So I'll reach back out to them to see if they've got an answer for us. Craig, if I fail to do so, do me a favor and
No, there's never been a crossing guard there. Yeah,
you know if it's striped as with the,
yeah, there's a crosswalk.
okay,
So-
that absolutely helps, because again, their two big objections was there's no traffic control device and there was no crosswalk. So if it's got both of those, we may be able to position a crossing guard. And that's at the light in front of Roth?
Yes.
Okay, I will check with the state.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on the process for the tentative budget?
No, sir.
Okay, and then, any questions on the process, as I mentioned, for parcel E? Like I said, I've got the latest information. I'll be sharing that in terms of, the list of what we're waiting for from the developer. I'll give a rundown of the meeting we had. And then, I also essentially closed the acceptance of the, petitions. It was 100 against the development and 1 for.
Okay.
And then, so like I said, any disagreement on the dot that we close down the hearing after this week and only open it once all this submission is in?
No, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Okay. Number 3, the local law to allow the town board to set longer durations for large project building permits. Again, this one was originated from the URMC. They said there's no way they're doing this in less than 2 years' time. And that's if everything goes as planned. So, the idea again was to allow it only for large projects. One of the fears, if you open that process up, do you have where everybody requests it for all kinds of reasons and creates issues for the town board? Because it's only for large projects, I'm not that concerned about it. And again, few projects are to the magnitude of what this URMC project will be. So I'm not that worried about it, but I don't know. So like I said, the idea is we'll hold the hearing. On this one, it's up to us as to whether we vote Wednesday or we have the hearing and then vote the following day. It's going to be on the agenda, but if it's tabled this week, it's not a huge issue. They're not, to my knowledge, they're not pulling their special use permit until December, I believe is when they were talking about, which means we'd have time to decide it in November. However, if we're all in agreement, I see no reason to wait. It's not something, again, with a huge impact like some of the other decisions that I think we need to
Exactly.
think through longer, but
What are we considering a large project? Exactly.
by definition in the town code, that's any project whose construction costs are, I believe it's $500,000 or more. Kevin, are you on?
Yes, yep. Any project that's subject to the large project surcharge would be over 500,000.
So, and that's only construction costs, to be clear. That's one of the things, by the way, I know someone put a watch on Linda because that $275 million project cost for URMC, that was their total cost. The construction costs are going to be significantly less than that. So we're only probably getting in 60% of what that initial number I was playing with.
But I mean, a lot of projects are probably over half. I mean, any fast food restaurant would be over $500,000. Or most, I would think.
How many projects a year see that surcharge, Kevin? Do you have a ballpark figure?
I don't know exactly, even a ballpark at this point. I can get that for you.
But in terms of the ones that really kick in and typically need the longer time, you're talking 2 or 3.
If that, they would need more than the 24 months.
Right.
But I understand RMC, they're needing more time for a project that size, but a $500,000 project.
Right, but let me ask the question, would the developer of Chick-fil-A want to push their project out for another year starting, right? Once they spend the money to start the construction, they almost all want to finish it quickly.
I'm always surprised that the projects that get approved and then it seems like forever before they get started. I've been kind of surprised at that, so.
Mike, this will be subject to town board approval anyway, so
Right.
you have final say. The board does.
Okay, thank you.
Number 4, we just want to discuss the creating a committee. Basically, we're looking at creating historic districts. So as we create this committee, we need to start looking at more details as to what goes into that. Becky, do you want to give additional information on this?
Sure, yeah. Gary on the Historic Site Committee had sent information over about a proposal to create a historic district in the West Henrietta Hamlet. And I had talked to Steve and Don and Gary about some questions about the creation of historic districts, since we don't have a very robust section in the town code about districts and what happens for non-historic properties within the district. Do they have to, well, there's a lot of questions. I'll just summarize by saying there's a bunch of questions that ultimately we would want to answer probably before we create a historic district. And so we talked about perhaps the best way to do that being to create a committee, sort of like you guys did on some of your other things like solar and incentive zoning, to sort of focus on answering those questions and before we move forward on it.
Who is the representative to the historic site? Lisa, okay. Because my thought is it would make sense to have the liaison there, to have the chair and vice chair from that
On Wednesday.
committee. I don't know. No. We'd
Okay.
have to set this up and
Oh,
just
we said
pick
it.
when a
Oh,
meeting is,
absolutely.
yeah.
And they're very excited to get involved, to get this going, and they're actually already working on going around and talking to people
Right.
that are in those different districts. But I don't know if I'm incorrect, but I don't see number 4 in my workshop packet. Does anybody else have number 4?
It's an info only.
Yeah, I was just trying to go through it here. I have number 5.
Did
I
you
haven't-
share Gary's?
No, I skipped that one.
Oh, sorry, yeah, Gary and I were going, I had some questions about what he submitted to find out whether some of the things that weren't included were intentional or not. I know that he was gonna just review that, so I haven't forwarded
Okay,
that on until we get those questions answered. So we didn't include it to avoid confusion, but I can send you the draft of what I've gotten so far if you'd like.
okay. I was just curious if it was missed because I didn't see it. I kept going back and forth thinking it was me. But yeah, so they've been talking about this. They're very excited about the whole process, and they really want people to understand all of the benefits of this happening. So I
So-
agree. I
right.
think they would be very open to having quite a few of them present.
So, well, I wouldn't want to, in terms of the committee to create the thing, I wouldn't want to get too big because then it starts to get unwieldy. But my thought is, like I said, myself, yourself as liaison, the chair and vice chair. Now, if one of them wants to designate someone else to take their place, that's up to them. Tina is historian. And then my thought is an owner of a historic property who is not part of the historic site committee. If we want it, that would bring us to 6. If we want a 7th, maybe have 2 historic property owners. Or maybe we have one person who owns a historic property that, one that is designated historic property, as well as then have somebody who lives in the district in a property, lives or owns a business in the property that is not currently
That
designated.
would be great. That would be really good to have, because then it can kind of open it up. So, owner of a historical
And
property.
I know when I spoke to Gary earlier this afternoon, he said he wasn't able to attend tonight's meeting, but he had mentioned that he saw some recommendation that I don't know if it is, but it might be useful to have somebody from like planning or zoning there too, or if you guys want to discuss it first and then just sort of bring them in the loop.
In that regards, I guess I would need to, one of the things that I don't know that we fully understand are what are the planning and zoning impacts from the historic district. So my point is, if they are numerous, then it might make sense. If they are minimal, then it doesn't make as much sense. And I guess the other question is, if there is something that they need, is the zoning board of appeals involved, or is it an Article 10, in which case it's the town board acting on recommendation from the historic site committee?
I think it's ultimately going to depend on what the subcommittee decides on what direction the district goes and how involves, does it require owner consent? Does it not? There's, I think it's ultimately going to depend on some of those answers that the committee decides on. Personally, that's just me speaking. I'm not a committee member right now.
Don, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Have you seen something like this in other towns? And would they, is there typically a significant impact from a planning or a zoning board of appeals standpoint?
I think can you hear me right now?
Yes.
We can.
Yep. I think based on what we're trying to accomplish here, which is to establish sort of the procedure for districting, I don't know that the zoning board or planning board is going to be terribly impacted. Perhaps we could get this rolling without them, and then if we see a need to include them down the line, we could do that.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm just. Becky, were you able to capture the 7 people that I had suggested?
Well, the recording definitely did. I know it's gonna be you, Lisa, Michelle,
Gary,
Gary.
Tina,
Tina, and then one resident with a historic site or house, registered historic house, and one resident in one of the future districts in it doesn't, I'm saying house, it could be a business owner, just making it clear, but
in a non-designated.
so one, right, one from who's in a designated house and one that's in a non-designated house.
Sounds good. And I'm sending you the proposal as is that I got from Gary, so you have that too.
Great. Any other questions, comments on that?
Yeah, so do we have like 2 districts right now and we're looking to establish more districts in the future?
So we don't have these type of districts. We've had these, like cobblestones, and it was speckled around the town, and then it was, there was ones for some of the hamlets, but then it only consisted of the houses that were registered. And Becky, correct me where I stray here. What we're talking about is this is more of a, it's a historic preservation area is another term I've heard for them.
Something similar to what they might have out in Victor?
Yeah, and so whether your house is on the registry or not, you are affected by some of what goes on there.
Okay.
Obviously, there's an added layer of protection if you do register your house, but yeah, so but like in Victor, they're limited as to they couldn't put up a big giant glass structure that's completely runs contrary to the nature. Right now we're looking at the West Hamlet because it is pretty close to the, essentially all historic buildings. The East Hamlet, due to fires, doesn't look like that anymore. So, it's going to be interesting as we talk about these. I know the one that's first up, correct? The first up, we're talking about the West Hamlet.
Yeah.
And so, but as we're doing this and we look down the road towards the East Hamlet, I think we're going to find that it'll have to be handled differently because again, the East Hamlet does not look historic anymore.
Okay.
It's pretty spread out. Gary did some great maps to show you what they're looking at for the West and the East Hamlets.
Yeah.
And so maybe we can reach out to him. I'm sure I have them because we've gone back and forth with them. I'm sure I have them home, but I can.
Yeah,
even
I've
make
seen those
copies of them.
before.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, as you said, the West is pretty much together, but the East, it's kind of spread out.
Yeah, and like I said, especially at the four corners,
Right.
almost all those properties burned down at one time or another. So, you've got modern buildings instead of historic buildings.
Right.
Whereas on the West Hamlet, you have like Ken's Pizza Corner, right, is occupying one of the more historic buildings in town. The Cartwright's unfortunately currently empty, but when it was operating, it was a restaurant, again, historic. The churches are still operating as churches within the historic building. So even as you move a little further away, you got the cobblestones where people are operating businesses, but they're still the cobblestones. You don't see much in the way of a modern building. And even then, the one development nearby that was more modern, they tried to stay consistent, that being Howard Konar's development. Tried to stay consistent from an architectural style standpoint with the district. And so that would be, whereas that was voluntary,
Right.
the idea would be that would be more required.
Okay.
That's the idea of these types of districts.
All right, that explains it. Thanks.
Would you agree with that summary of what we're talking about, Becky?
I agree with that summary, yeah.
Great. Okay, any other questions on number 4? Number 5, basically, I was able to reach an agreement with the property owner for 3440 East River Road. That's the last parcel along that stretch where we need the easement for the East River Road sidewalk. Thankfully, there's a plug out to full service real estate agents. The individual does not speak English, and the realtor has been, who sold him not sold him the property, but who completed the transaction. She's been essentially my interpreter and go-between for all this. She's been phenomenal. He has agreed to essentially, so the problem is where the easement comes through his driveway, it's a short driveway. He can fit 4 cars. If we put the easement there, where there's a sidewalk, he can't park cars there.
Right.
He now only can fit 2 cars. So I proposed to him, what if we built an extension? He was good with that. I was able to obtain the necessary variance to build the extension. I gave him the final layout. I shared it with Chuck Marshall, our Commissioner of Public Works. He thinks he can get to it soon. So
are you widening it?
we're not widening it, we're creating a turnoff.
Oh,
It's
okay,
either, it's 2 spaces to make up
Okay.
for the 2 spaces.
Gotcha.
lost.
okay.
So he'll have the exact same capacity. It's gonna be in the front yard. His septic thankfully is out the back of the house, so it won't conflict with the septic. Basically, I'm working with Don to put together an agreement, which basically says in exchange for us building the driveway, they will grant us the easement.
Sounds
I'm just gonna need you guys, obviously, to give me the authority to do that. The cost to do the driveway from a material standpoint is actually under the, it's about 2,000 to 3,000, depending on the ground we find there. It's under what's needed for a board resolution, but the contract itself, the easement itself requires board approval, so I figured just put it all together.
So will there be any zoning required, any zoning variance required for
I
this?
already have it.
Okay. All right.
Are you doing the whole driveway?
No, we weren't planning on doing the whole driveway. We were gonna just tie it into the existing driveway. Any other questions on that one?
Answered it.
For number 6, we've got a street light and pole. This is for the end of, what's that, Longview Trail? Long
On trail.
Long Trail Lane, that's it. And so it's basically that with how dark it is there and the fact that East Henrietta Road makes a bend, a lot of people aren't aware that that intersection is there at night. And so the thought was if we put a light, it would improve. And so whereas if we were lighting the whole street, putting street lights up and down the street, we would most likely create a lighting district and they'd be charged for electricity. For intersection ones, that typically comes out of the street lighting general fund.
Okay.
Right now, the estimate, we don't have a firm quote, but because again of the reduced number of meetings, as soon as that comes in, the quote we have right now is 8,600, but that wasn't finalized. So if I remember correctly, I put a $10,000 not to exceed amount, just in case it comes up a little higher. We don't have to come back to the board. I don't expect it to be that much, but I just wanted to give us some room, just in case.
So being that this is on East Henrietta Road, what's needed for that to be approved is?
So we will need to talk to New York State DOT. It's possible we can do it all within our right of way.
Okay.
Which means we won't need a permit, but we still are talking to them to make sure we don't want to upset the New York State DOT by doing something that they think is not appropriate. I don't think they'll have an issue with the light.
Okay.
We've reached out to them. We haven't gotten a formal response back yet, but like I said, I don't see that being an issue. Anything that generally, if it's improving safety and it doesn't cost them anything, I'm not sure why they would turn it down, but
Okay.
The light would obviously have to meet New York State DOT standards, but all of ours do, to my knowledge, so.
And it's definitely needed there because it is dark there. There's just nothing.
Is there any neighbors that might object to that?
Not that I'm aware of. You know, we could definitely, he asked whether there were any neighbors that it could object. Mike, could you move your mic a little closer to you? Because I don't think you're picking up all that well.
If there was any neighbors.
Any neighbors that might object to the light? The person who is closest to that is the one resident who has been, I'm just seeing if there's other.
I know the one house right on that street just sold about 6 months ago.
Right.
There's new people in there.
So, but that's a good point. We'll reach out. Craig, do you want to tackle that? There's, I'd say, you know, let's just throw maybe 100-foot radius around there and talk to any house that hits just to make sure they're okay with it. That's a good point, Mike. Thank you. Anything else on that one? We already talked about 7, 8. So the property on Calkins Road, if you remember, that was originally donated by the Tinker family, the Aldridge family. And whereas the land south of Calkins Road was donated with the intention of being a park, the land north was intended to remain agricultural land. And so we are looking at renewing the agricultural lease. Mark Green has been leasing it for some time. Becky, did we put out, is this one of the extension years, or have we put out a call to see if there was any other interest?
We have not advertised for other interests, no.
So, and when does the current lease expire?
Current lease expires November 30th, 2020.
And when was he looking, do you know if he has a date as to when he's gonna plant? What I'm getting at is, would we be able to push back to the November meeting? If maybe what we do, we change this rather than authorizing it, do we advertise for anyone else who's interested? I will say this, based on previous years, we're not gonna get any.
It's like 10 acres, right? How many acres
It's
is it?
like 30 acres in here.
Do you know the acreage, Becky?
45.
It's 30 acres.
30 acres, okay.
30 acres. At $45 per acre.
And he's the same gentleman who's been running it for years, right?
Correct.
Just don't want to lose our renter.
No, I know, and I don't think we will. I just.
Yeah.
Now, what I don't remember is if we'd written it previously that there was essentially, you know, the ability to renew by resolution. So if we're in one of those renewal years, then, so I'll go back and look through it. If we're in one of the renewal years, as far as I'm concerned, he's been doing great. We've had 0 complaints. He's worked with us with regards to the potential for a cell tower. So if we're in one of the renewal years, then in my opinion, I'm fine with just renewing it. If we're not in one of the renewal optional renewal years, then in my opinion, I think we ought to instead call for quotes for other farmers. Again, whereas I think Mark's been great, it's just a fairness standpoint.
When you say renewal, because this says it's a 1-year lease,
Right.
do you think you have a longer and then he just comes back every year just to
No,
be-
so the way we've written them, a lot of these in the past, because you're not able to bind future boards, it's, there's a restriction on what you can bind the use of land. It's 1 year, but it has an option for the board to renew it.
Okay.
Well, both parties obviously have to be, we're not gonna renew something he's not
That's-
interested in.
That's how the Chase Farm Partnership agricultural leases agreement is written, but that's unfortunately not how
Okay,
this one is written. That was at the request of Chase Farm Partnership that it be for multiple years.
yeah,
So
so,
it's 2 years with the option to renew.
Mhm.
right, so we ought to take a look at that, converting this one so that
Same.
every year we don't have to go out to bid.
Right. That's what stuck in my mind was the Chase one.
Yeah, that's, I guess I was thinking of that
Yeah.
one.
So I'd say, yeah, renew or send it out.
So it sounds like we have to go out. Any disagreement on that?
No.
Don, do you agree that because it didn't have the option to renew like the other one did, that we have to go back out?
Yeah, I mean, technically, yeah.
Okay, so why don't we just, I'll give them a call, let them know that, because we didn't put that renewal option in, that we're gonna go back out to bid, and that the next contract will have it in there.
Exactly.
That way, because again, he's been doing a great job working it. I've heard zero complaints from any of the neighbors. And again, he's been great in terms of working with us as we've been doing some other stuff in that area, so. So I'll work on changing the drafting of this very quick, right after the meeting.
Okay.
Town hall autumn hours. You didn't want to call them half-day hump days. Becky, I'm gonna let you give your pitch as to why.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we went with autumn Wednesdays rather than hump day, half day. But yeah, so as you guys probably know, we've been sort of digging ourselves out of a hole since February. We've been short staffed for a large portion of the year, much of it during tax collection times. And we're just trying to figure out, there's only so many hours in a day, how on earth we catch up. So we're proposing that potentially, now that we're, believe it or not, almost to the end of school tax collection, which ends on Monday, November 2nd, that maybe we could do something sort of like we did in the summertime for the months of November and December, that we do a half day closed to the public on Wednesdays. Steve was thinking that Wednesdays might be a better day to avoid any sort of issues with residents and their schedules, because if we're closed, they can obviously come back the next day. So from November 4th through December 30th, that we would close at 1 p.m. on Wednesdays, which would give us just 4 hours of uninterrupted time to try to catch up on everything that we're struggling with.
So would that be the same as the Friday 1 o'clock close where someone had an appointment, they could schedule something? Or no?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sometimes like we're doing a lot of marriage licenses right now.
That's
And if
what
a couple
I was
like can only come in on a Wednesday and they wanted to schedule something, obviously we're here, so we could still do that depending on what's going on and what's the needs are for somebody's schedule for like a marriage license in particular. Sometimes even just notary, we've done a couple things that we've come in and well, I say come in, we're here, but we've, come and get somebody from the door to bring them inside.
Okay.
So one of the other things that when we were talking about this is what I would take a look at then is next year when we're putting together the town hall operation schedules, we take a look at making this consistent so that, on the door, it would have the shortened hours for the months of, and we pick those months. So it might be June, July, August, November, and December. And then it's the full hours, the other 7 months, which are essentially tax collection season. So that it's more consistent, more predictable. And people don't get caught by surprise that they show up on a Friday afternoon in the summer and find out it's closed. And like I said, I suggested Wednesdays for the simple reason, there were 2 main reasons. One, if it's closed on a Friday, I've now got 2.5 days I have to wait before I can do my business as opposed to half a day.
Right.
The second thing is most of our major meetings are on Wednesdays. So if you watch the clerks having to get ready for a major meeting while there's a whole lot of activity going on, it's tough for them. And so to have that reduced walk-up activity at that time would be beneficial.
That,
I'm just concerned with people showing up in the office,
Right.
it being closed.
So, one of the things we'd have to do is really get that information out there. Maybe the first week we announce it, but if, we take a look at that because of for lack of a better way to put it, short notice that, if someone does show up, we still service them at the window, but, we make it clear that we're changing the schedule. Something like that.
You could put it in the Henrietta newsletter and then Henrietta highlights. I think people look at all of those things,
Yeah.
but it makes perfect sense to me.
Number 10, so we've got the town hall holiday schedule. One of the things we're doing in this union contract negotiations is rather than bake the schedule right into the union contract, which then requires us to open it back up if we ever want to change something, we're baking in the days. So we have 13 holidays. They were all previously allocated. As most of you are probably aware, the governor signed something to making Juneteenth, so June 18th, an official state holiday. And so we took a look at, okay, which holiday makes the most sense to move. I proposed moving Good Friday, as it was more religious in nature. There was some pushback from the union. We don't have their final answer yet, but we'll have to wait and see. They do have sign-off authority on that. If they don't want to move it, then we may not be able to observe Juneteenth. But that's basically what again, the tentative holiday schedule. Maribeth went through the calendar and put them together as to which days are observed, because some of the holidays fall on weekends. So any questions, comments?
And going forward, is it June 18th always, or is it on the
Well,
third Friday, or on that Friday?
So I don't know, I haven't read the legislation itself. I don't know if somebody on the call has and wishes to speak to that. But, I assume if it's on the weekends, it's observed to the near, I don't know. So if it's a Wednesday, do you get Wednesday off? The holiday is the 18th. I don't know what they do for observed, right? Because some of them right, is Memorial Day, that's always the Monday, so some of them always end up on a particular day. But to my knowledge, has anybody on the call read the actual legislation? Or might know that answer?
well, we'll have to do
Apparently
some
not.
research.
We'll have to do some research.
I tried to look at, I couldn't find it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know that it's necessarily published right now. It's just the press release. So I don't know what its observation schedule will be.
It says it says this public holiday to be celebrated statewide on June 19th every year.
Or 19th, I was saying 18th, sorry.
Okay,
19th.
so that's in 2021, that would be Saturday, so it's celebrated on the 18th.
Oh, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah, exactly.
June 19th. That's what it
And then
says.
if it was on a Sunday, it would be observed on the following Monday, and then the rest of the week, it would be observed on that particular day. So
So
it sounds of it.
yeah, so it could be, okay, I could see why some people, they
I don't even know if that was necessarily it. I think it has more to do with Good Friday is often during spring break from school. I think that was the bigger pushback.
right.
Creates a
I know
3-day,
people go away.
right,
I know non-COVID years.
yeah, non-COVID years. Yeah, I don't know if it's as big a deal this particular year,
Right.
but
can say as a state employee that we don't observe Good Friday.
So as soon as we hear back from the union, what up or down, I'll let you guys know.
All right.
And then unless somebody has something else, then what my thought is that we will conclude the regular business.
You guys want to approve some minutes?
That's what I was gonna, just about to say, we're gonna
I'm
conclude
so-
the regular business, including approval of the minutes, and we'll go into the info only, so we're technically not going to adjourn. As it's still a public meeting, but, there was a request from,
From me.
mostly from Millie, but for Lisa as well, that they aren't as familiar as to what we had done with the comprehensive land use plan update. Anything else before we do minutes?
I just, where do we stand on, have you had any more discussions with school district about Good Shepherd?
No, between budget and union contract negotiations, I did not, other than I let Andy Whitmore know that I'd been authorized, but I just haven't had a chance to get to it.
Can somebody go over there from the town and kind of give us a guesstimate of cost that would, I'm not sure if there's lead paint in there because we noticed some chipping
Right.
and stuff like that. And the roof kind of wasn't in great shape.
I'll see if we can get that done.
I have bills this month.
So, all right. Does that mean you want that thing to wait till next month?
So that's fine. I got this month.
I don't know, yeah. I was wondering that.
Okay. So let me put that on. Estimate. For Good Shepherd. Okay. Anything else? Can I get a,
Steve, it's Kevin.
go ahead.
Kevin, just get back to Mike real quick. As far as the large projects in town, I went back to the last 4 years and it's averaging around 27 projects that will be subject to the large project surcharge.
27.
Yeah. This year we only had 11 for obvious reasons, but
Right. But how many of those move into the, what I'll refer to as, I'll call it very large, where it's, tens of millions?
yeah, like I was saying, probably one, if that, one or two a year
Right.
would actually I would think would need more time. However, there are some projects that have gone over the time frame, and right now they're paying, that portion of the permit fees over to extend it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, one of the things to be clear on the way it works is you have to do it up front. If they have a sudden slowdown, they can't come back to us after the fact, make excuses as to why they didn't get it done. They get
Right.
that 6 month I won't say automatic, but it's effectively automatic. They go to Kevin and request it, and it's granted. So they already today get a 6 month extension if they're running late, but if they're running significantly late for whatever reason, then they do have to do the renewal. Because again, the whole point of those is to keep the projects moving so as to avoid, like the east-west is one that is kind of sat, or the old Jiffy Lube that was actually technically in the town of Brighton, but right on Brighton Henrietta Town Line Road, that it lingered forever.
No, and that's what I just didn't want these projects hanging out there forever.
Right.
And, I understand the big, huge projects that, like at Marketplace,
Right.
taking more than 18. I understand that. I just kind of,
And so to Kevin's point, we're not obligated to approve them. We're going to take a look at that. make it pretty clear that it's, you know, large. It really is these, I'll call them extra large projects. So they'd have to make good justification as to why, you know, a $1 million construction cost projects really needs more than 18 months. So. Any
No,
other?
I've had $1,500 residential projects that have taken 3 years as well. so.
Is there a way to really spell this out using an attorney, or do we want to just leave it like this?
Which,
The 500,000 as that number?
the point is, right today, we have 3 categories. So if we want to, we can, instead of making the large projects, we could create a category of very large project that was more than 5 million or more than 10 million.
I got you.
That's up to us. I just use large project because it's the largest
Well, it
current
is the largest
definition that's in
we have.
there. If we want to make a new definition, we absolutely can.
Okay.
If that's what you're worried about, we could make it
I don't know if that's what
a
you're
very
concerned
large
about or not.
project that, you know, that whose construction costs are 5 million or greater, something like that, or 10 million or greater.
You know, really, unless they run into some financial difficulties, most of these people move right along with their projects.
Right. So that's
That's
completely
up to the
you.
board.
Yep. So we can discuss that more at the public hearing
Will
as to
do.
whether it makes sense to leave it as is, or do we up the, and the easiest way to do it, in my opinion, from a definition is, you know, anticipated construction costs, because they have to submit that for the building permit anyway. The building
Okay.
permit is based off of those construction costs.
Yeah,
So it makes it something very easy to say you're in this next threshold.
so like for the dorms that we're doing over at RIT.
You're talking about Apex, the.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean,
the
that's a
student apartments.
large project,
That,
right?
and that one absolutely falls into what I'll call the very large category.
right?
Now, in that one, what they did is, because it would have taken too long to do it all at once, they broke it into 2 phases. So each one has that,
Okay.
18 to 24 month phase.
Okay.
And arguably, they could do some of that, but at the URMC, but when you look at the cost or the amount of work that's going to go into building that tower, it's going to take time.
Right.
Anything else? Any other directors? Hearing none, can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes from October 13th, 2020.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Councilmember Barley,
Aye.
Councilmember Stafford,
Aye.
Councilmember Safranik,
Aye.
Councilmember Bolzner,
Aye.
Supervisor Schultz.
Aye. So that concludes the business portion of the meeting. Again, the meeting will continue as I will be bringing new board members, well, not just myself, new board members up to speed on the 2019 Comprehensive Land Use Plan update. As far as staff members, I think Craig and Chris are about it necessary for the discussion. Otherwise, the rest of the staff members, you're done for this meeting. Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Night.
Aye.
So the comprehensive land use plan update actually started before I took office. It came about, there was an issue with apartment complexes appearing in locations that they were not well suited for. And in addition, that they were using up valuable industrial land. When you look at the cost ratio of development, and for the town, that basically means the best way to describe that is the cost of the infrastructure to support that development over the amount of tax revenue generated. You get the best return on industrial property. You get the worst return on apartment complexes. And so, you know, there were twofold issues that were happening as these apartment complexes were appearing in industrial land. Well, three really. One, it was negatively affecting our tax base. Two, we were losing valuable industrial land, and then had to start looking as to where could we add additional industrial land. And then three, often the traffic patterns that can support industrial are different than the traffic patterns that can support residential. And so you're ending up with some places where there were traffic issues were created because of these apartment complexes. So again, in the previous administration, they put down a moratorium and they were going to look at redoing multifamily housing. As they started to meet and do that work, it started to blossom. And it went beyond just looking at multifamily and looking at the whole comprehensive land use plan as to where should the future growth in the town be. Some of this also came out of the fiasco that was the Southwest Quadrant, GEIS, where they were looking at potentially rezoning a bunch of farmland into industrial property, and which instantly met a lot of resistance and pushback from the town, rightly so. Because one of the things, if you look at it was the 2011 comprehensive land use plan update, when they had actually polled the residents and they said, which of these things are important to you? Something mid to high 90% responded that on the two of the items that were important were preserving the agricultural heritage of the town, especially south of the Thruway, and preserving as much open space, especially south of the Thruway. So the fact that the Southwest Quadrant was going to rezone a bunch of that into industrial, there was a lot of pushback in that regards. So it kind of grew out of there and became this comprehensive land use plan update that the previous board took over when Mike, Rob, and I joined in January of 2018. It had already been going on for, boy, I want to say at least a year.
2 years, 18 months to 2 years almost, Scott would say.
And so, you know, at that point, we decided that it wasn't fair to developers to have this moratorium where they couldn't basically there could be no work done on multifamily dwellings to just keep extending it. And so, in fact, it was up like one of the first, I don't remember if it was January, February, March, somewhere in that time frame of 2018. And so we extended it. But one of the things we did is we kicked the meeting frequency up to twice a month. And they were 2 to 3 hour meetings each. And we really went through a lot of stuff. And some of the things that came up in that, in addition to that work alone, we also incorporated a number of the other things that were going on. So the farmland protection plan was just wrapping up when we took office. And we basically, you know, dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's, got it all wrapped up, put together the final recommendation and report, and adopted that. So that was folded into it. Previously, there had been an active transportation plan. An active transportation plan is basically talks about, you know, so as the county or state come in and redo parts of the road, it kind of puts the onus on them to put in wide enough shoulders for bike lanes or to improve the sidewalks. So you're seeing that, the results of that on Jefferson Road, as they've been fixing up Jefferson Road.
Right.
In the areas where the sidewalks were deficient, they've been adding them. there was the East River Road corridor study where we were, looking at all the problems of all the development that went along there. One of these side effects of a previous piece of legislation or comprehensive land use update, when they created the rural residential districts, they stopped them at the Lakeville, Avon, and Livonia railroad tracks that are west of West Henrietta Road. The land to the west of that, which was Riverton and some of the lands that were supposed to be Riverton but were never rezoned, basically it pushed all the development there. So that's Berkshire and all of those, Queens Park, all of those developments in there. And the negative effect of that, of course, is the only way out from that portion of town because of the railroad and the river was East River Road. And so East River Road was getting to the point where it just could not support the traffic in a good manner. And so basically what we did is the town put together what they expected the future development, what we called full build out. So if all the properties along East River Road were developed, and here's, we had a traffic consultant come in and give us an estimate of how much traffic would be on the road. The county looked at that traffic and said, well, if that much traffic was on the road, here are the improvements we would need to do to the corridor to make that traffic flow properly. And then what we did is we essentially took the impact counts so that traffic on the road during non-peak hours isn't that big a deal. The road can handle it. It's during the peak travel times where the issue is. So they looked at the amount of vehicles being added to the peak traffic time. They took the total, so they wanted to assign a portion of the cost. The county's picking up the lion's share, but they wanted to assign a portion of the cost to the people who are doing the development along that corridor. And so we took that cost, divided it by the total build out number of vehicles, and that came as a per vehicle seeker mitigation. So the idea is, it's not fair to 3 people building a thing and the 4th person adds, and theirs is the project that, the straw that breaks the proverbial camel's back. And so they shouldn't have to pick up all the mitigation costs to fix that, to make that flow again. The idea is if we've got 4 projects coming in, they should each pay a 4th of it. And so that's what we did. That's in place. We've been collecting that money on a number of projects, but so that was also folded in. The main things as we looked at, in addition to those studies all folded in, again, was the multifamily. So the thing is, if we're pulling it out we pulled it out of most of the districts in town. If we were pulling it out of those districts, we had to provide some place for it to go. There are still a couple districts where it's allowed. The planned unit development, i.e. Riverton, that's one. Commercial B2 was still allowed. And then we added a new, R215, which is specifically multifamily residential. And then we added a new designation being, or new area could go, and that was these multi-use overlay districts. So multi-use, normally in zoning, I have a residential use or a commercial use or an industrial use. I don't mix my uses. Now, it's a commercial zone has a bunch of different types of commerce, and an industrial zone has a bunch of different types of industry. In an industrial zone, I can typically have commercial and vice versa, but usually residential and commercial/industrial do not mix. But there is a push in that direction for homes to be in and amongst where people work. And so then we took a look at and said, okay, if we're going to go for that, where should it be in town? And there were 3 locations we identified. So the first is what I refer to as the we used the term tired when we were discussing it, for lack of a better adjective, retail district in the northwest portion of town. So when you go to some of those, the older plazas, retail plazas, Southtown Plaza, Jefferson Plaza, Marketplace Mall, these are areas where you're starting to see larger vacancies in the stores because the infrastructure, especially in the areas where the infrastructure was old and was going to require a bunch of updating to attract new customers, they were having trouble getting tenants, plain and simple. And so we said, well, you know, one of the things that we hear all the time on town board is, why did you pick that location for this? Why didn't you put it over here? We point out that's not our choice. That's the developers, right? So we can't force them where to go, but we can encourage them where to go. And one of the things we hear all the time is, why did you allow someone to build on this empty parcel of land when there were existing buildings sitting around? So one of the first steps in that regards was this, the multi-use redevelopment area.
Overlay.
Yeah, the overlay district, but at MURA, M-U-R-A, multi-use redevelopment area. And that was, again, it's an overlay district on top of Marketplace Mall, Southtown, Jefferson, Scuddy Plaza. It's all that area in the northwest. And the way an overlay zoning district works is I can either build to the underlying district, so whatever that may be, industrial, commercial, whatever, or I can build to the overlay district. And the way these multi-use overlay districts were, they have maximums and minimums for each type of use. So, you know, and they change, you'd have to go and look in the code to get the exact numbers, but you know, we went with something like 40% residential and, you know, 40%, depending on the zone, it might have been 40% commercial or 50% commercial and then 10% public space. There are two ways to do a mixed use development. One is by breaking it up by acreage, for lack of a better way to describe it. So in other words, I say, okay, I've got 10 acres. I'm going to use 4 acres to put in an apartment complex. And right next to that, I'm going to use 5 acres to put in a shopping area. And then in between, I'm going to have, you know, 1 acre of park area, right? Maybe, you know, if I'm building a big water retention pond, maybe I put a path around it and picnic table areas and a gazebo and that kind of stuff. The other method is doing it by square footage. And the example of that is Park Point. If you've ever been over to Park Point, and the buildings, the first floor are commercial and the upper floors are residential. So, you know, again, we worked into as we talked about that, we looked at these examples, and you can do that measurement either way. Either I can set aside, so I can have distinct uses in separate buildings laid out in a common large parcel, or as we called it, super parcel, or I can have the use literally mixed within the building. We were of the opinion we didn't want to limit the creativity of what the developers did, but you know, it was a way to encourage either type of development. And so to do one of those, they need to get a special use permit. Now, going back to the acreage, just some things you'll hear us talk about. When it's planned, you can have multiple parcels and it's sort of this project, and you define the project area and that stays with it. And so my point is, if I break it up as by acreage and I say, you know, you've got 4 acres to build your apartment complex, if that person wants to, whoever's building that complex wants to put in a store, all the parties involved have to come back and all agree on it, because you don't want, you know, if there's a maximum amount of retail space and the people on the 5 acres we're gonna use up all the allowable space, and you don't wanna have a scenario where, well, this guy decided to put a convenience store on the corner, and now that's gonna limit what this developer does, because a lot of times what happens is once they create the thing, they, they bring in a specific developer and they parcel out the part that they're gonna develop. And so one of the things, we have this concept of, you've got that original project to find space, and if someone wants to come back with changes, we allow changes, but everybody has to agree on them. Because again, we don't want to create this competitive situation where someone goes in to build their store first because I can have a maximum of 50% stores and I'm going to steal. That wasn't the deal by which they sold it. If they're willing to agree to that, that's fine too. So that's some of the concepts we built into that. So for right now, I've been talking about the redevelopment area, which again is that old retail space. We also had a redevelopment corridor, which is along 15A. There's all those old houses that are now
East Henrietta Road, yeah.
yeah, East Henrietta Road, and that there's all these houses that they're old houses, but they're being used for commercial purposes. The idea, could somebody, now that one was treated separately because whereas in the northwest quadrant, where the Mura area, you had large parcels, good amount of frontage, large parking area, stuff like that. You don't have that in the corridor, and I have issues with stuff backing up. And the idea there is we wanted to create something more along the lines of, like a town center type of look where, it's not as commercial necessarily looking plaza, although again, preferably something that doesn't look like a converted house. And I use the term converted loosely because it still looks like a house. They added a sign. That's what a lot of them look like. But that the idea is, the parking out front, think Shown Place, stuff like that, where it's, streets of shops, small shops. We didn't want parking and stuff in the back because unlike the retail areas,
Right.
where they back up to other retail and industrial, in this corridor, they back up to homes. And so the idea is we wanted vehicles, parking, all the, stuff like that out front so as to minimize the impact on the residential properties behind it. So that one was handled slightly different. And then the third one was the multi-use employment area or employment center, or I don't remember what the fourth letter was. And that is, there was a bunch of potentially industrial land south of the RIT campus. This was Old Farm, and it had been, and actually a bunch of it was already rezoned industrial. And the thought was there was some competing interest in housing there as well. And when you talk about, I refer to them as the Millennial Office Park, a lot of them want to be able to live where they work so that their dependence on cars goes down. And so that was the idea, to be able to encourage that. And it creates a good mix of housing and industrial. It kind of helps, it keeps it from being overrun as all apartments. Whereas, if we left multifamily as a use there, you run the risk that it all gets developed as apartments. We have all kinds of traffic issues because of that. And again, it negatively affects our tax base and negatively affects where our industry can go. So that one, again, it's about 40% maximum resident multifamily housing. We've already had a couple projects. One has been stalled for quite some time. That's on the Wallman property. I don't know where it's going to go, but basically they were looking at a student housing in about 40% of the acreage, and then the remaining was going to be industrial sites, and then they were going to do a like a public
Is that Bailey
Park.
Road?
That's off of East River Road. Between, the parcel goes from East River Road almost all the way over to John Street.
Okay.
There, when they were looking at this before, the whole thing was gonna be a giant apartment complex. That didn't go through largely because the project went under, they lost funding. Yeah, they basically backed out before final approval was gained. There was pushback from residents. And one of the things in this, we've put the same requirement on the people doing the development, that they need a second entrance, that it can't all go in and out of East River Road because that causes issues. So whether they work with a property owner to the north of them, that's in between them and Bailey Road to get out to Bailey Road, the best path would be out through some of Rich Lafroy's property out to John Street, and he's agreed to, work to make that happen. The absolute best one would be if Paychex was willing to basically shift the very southern portion of the parking lot. That could be a road out for the Wallman property, and then the Wallman property would give them the easternmost portion of their property to make up for the lost parking space. For some reason, Paychex didn't agree to that. I think it might have just been because they didn't want to have to go through the paperwork of doing it. But that's the one that actually makes the most sense if that whenever goes around and gets developed. The other one, and this one has a much stronger chance because the developer involved has already completed two and finishing a third major complex in town. This is the southwest corner of, it's actually on two sides of the intersection of Lehigh Station Road and East River Road, both the northeast corner and the southeast corner. That project originally went in, it was a Morgan, Spalletta, and Christa project, and it actually was submitted the day the moratorium went into effect. Well, as you can imagine, with the funding issues surrounding Morgan, it never got built. My understanding is that they, sold that off. I don't know if the sale's actually taken place or if it's currently in the process of being sold. But basically, that other developers come in. They are largely apartment developers, so their plan is the northeast corner would be an apartment complex. The southeast corner would be a industrial complex. And for the public amenities, they were going to take our East River Road sidewalk and bring it as a linear park through their project, because when you get south of Fairwood Drive, there's a creek and wetlands right along the East River Road. You can't put the sidewalk right along the road. And so across from Fairwood Drive, it would move away from the road around to the east of the wetlands through their property and then come back out to the intersection of Lehigh Station and East River Road. They would also then continue it to the south on their industrial property as well. So that would be basically their 10% would be that linear park, as well as they were going to build a large public greens for, both people who are in the apartments as well as people who are in the office park / industrial park to be able to go to. So they presented the conceptual plans to us. To my knowledge, we've not seen anything submission at planning board. Is that correct, Craig? So for the record, Craig said correct. But that's one that I do expect to see in the not too distant future. So when we were doing all this, going back to the question about, well, how do we encourage people to use developers to look for existing buildings rather than always going for the open space? Because in many cases, building open space is actually cheaper to build than either to renovate an existing building or to tear down an existing building and build a new one in its location. You know, if we're trying to keep as much open space for as long as we can, you would want to encourage developers to go that route where they're revitalizing versus building new. And that was the idea of incentive planning. But at that point, the moratorium had been in effect for a long time, and whereas we'd already extended it twice, I basically told them we're not extending it a third time. And so we made the hard decision to put off finishing the incentive zoning and the solar codes until basically the idea was we would adopt this stuff as is. We talk about it initially in the environmental impact statement, but we don't go into a whole lot of details. And we left those two off for the reason that, especially the incentive zoning, it's one of those, you don't want to mess that up.
We're waiting for you women to come on and help
That's
us with that.
But you know, it's one of those, you don't want to rush that one into existence because it's something that could be abused. And so, you know, one of the things we all agreed on is that we didn't want where you see some towns where it's essentially an extra fee to build. They make everything in the code really restrictive, and if you want to be able to do anything, well, you have to give cash as your incentive zoning. We didn't want to see that happen. In fact, we don't even allow cash with one exception, and that's if it's for a larger mitigation or improvement like the East River Road, we would allow them to essentially participate. So a couple different projects could go in together. And the idea is we would create a designated fund that is used only for that purpose, and the money would be put in there, and the money could only be used for improve, you know, the type of specified improvements in that project fund. Now, if we were creating that, I would absolutely make sure we had a secondary ability, because you don't want to lock it down for something, collect this money, find out, oh, we can't do it because there's a native burial site in the path, so we can't do it. Now what do we do with the money, right? But the point is, it would have to be used for something very similar to what the original project was. And again, that would get, when we create those, we would want to make sure we specify, in addition to the primary use, what's the other use could be for any excess funds. Because the other thing that comes up is if you collect from 3 different projects, you do it, you go out and you find, hey, the process has gotten more efficient, we're able to do it, we come in under budget, what do I do with the rest of the money? I could return it back, or again, if we basically say, for instance, I can do improvements to sidewalks within the area, right? That's one that will probably always be a default,
Right.
Is that, you know, we'll put a particular radius. We can do sidewalk improvements to any, you know, major road or collector road within a 3-mile radius or something like that. So those are what we're looking at, the incentives. As you've seen, as we've been developing it based off of the feedback from those meetings, we were looking at a number of different types of incentives. So one was obviously the incentive to try to get people to reuse existing buildings, especially long dormant or dilapidated buildings. That's one of them. The second one was what I refer to as drag along infrastructure. That's if I have 2 paths to bring infrastructure to my property, and one brings it by a bunch of homes that don't have that infrastructure. Even if that's more expensive, we would want to encourage a developer to come along that path so that those homes can get that infrastructure. And the one I always use as an example is the Freemason senior living facility that they're talking about on the northeast corner of Middle Road and Erie Station. If they bring the infrastructure down Middle Road, there's about a dozen houses there that do not have water or sewer. And where water is especially problematic because whereas they were on wells or still are on wells, and that was okay. Now that there's a whole lot more industrial properties in there, there's a greater chance for groundwater pollution affecting their drinking water. We'd rather get them on municipal water if we can. So that's a perfect example of where, you know, we would give them an incentive to bring their water and sewer down Middle Road instead of tapping off of Erie Station or East Henrietta Road. So,
So are these, so the incentive areas, are they already pre-identified?
yeah, they are. The way incentive zoning works under New York State law, town law, is basically you have to identify the zones by which they work. Now, some of them we made town-wide. So for instance, we wanted to have incentives for historic properties. One of the things we take a look at is that, you know, if buying a historic property and renovating it, there's an added cost to doing that. And so we wanted to encourage people to do that, you know, to do some of the great, you look at the Horizon Group and what they did with that cobblestone house, or LaBelle Insurance and what she did with her cobblestone house, right? Those are great success stories. And we want to see more people do that. And so, you know, the thing is, when you look at some of them, they're often in these places where they'll have issues, you know, they'd have to get a ton of variances. They'd have to get a, you know, they might want to do some stuff that otherwise might not be allowed within the zoning laws. The idea is this gives us some flexibility where we can say, as your incentive, you know, we will reduce your requirement for parking. We'll give you reduced setbacks. We'll let you, you know, do mixed use within the structure, even though it's not in the mixed use district, those kinds of things. It allows us to provide additional incentives. And basically what happens is when you have a zone, it talks about, here's the overview of why we're doing this. Here is the community benefit that we're getting from that. So in this case, the one I was just talking about, it's the preservation of historic properties. And here are the types of incentives that I can get. And, you know, it's up to the town that they should be of about equal, the community benefits should be about equal or greater value than the incentives we give. You know, it's not, one of the things that's clear, it's not every project gets this just because they're in an incentive zone. They actually have to produce the community benefit, and it has to be something that's valuable. The other thing we made very clear is it's not stuff that is specific to your property. So for instance, if we always require developers to put sidewalks on their project, they can't get credit on their property. They can't say that that's the community benefit. No, that's part of what you're required to do as part of zoning. Now, if you want to extend that sidewalk for a mile down the road so it connects to the next major sidewalk, that's a community benefit. But just putting the sidewalk on your own street frontage, there's no community benefit. That's a requirement for you to do for your own development. Same thing in terms of, you know, if they're doing something major and they require, you know, they're on, I don't know, the county basically comes in and says, you need to put a roundabout in here as your traffic control because the amount of traffic you're generating. Well, that might be helping the other traffic as well. But let's face it, that is a mitigation for their property without their development going in. That wouldn't be there. And so again, we wouldn't see that as a big community benefit. Now, if there was a problem intersection and they were going to be nearby and the county said it's going to have some minor effect, and they're like, we're willing to change this whole thing to a roundabout at great expense. If it's greater than what they're required to mitigate, then we could consider it a community benefit.
So if a developer is investing in something that's a community benefit, then we have the ability to offer an incentive.
You got it. And some examples of some of those incentives. So I'm going to go back to the Freemasons. It would be increased density. So that area is a rural residential, which means the number of units per acre is low. They'd like more. Now, one of the things we're gonna have to play with is how do we add that more so that we don't negatively affect the character of that neighborhood. One of the nice things is the way the ground slopes, we talked about that, well, what if on the buildings farthest away from the homes, the ones closest to the north, we added an extra floor. From Erie Station Road, you know, or even two, right? From Erie Station Road, the rooftops would be about the same. If I had a 2-story building at Erie Station Road, I could probably have a 4 or 5-story building near the thruway, and they'd be at the same eye level. That would be a way to get additional units per acre without taking up a whole lot, you know, because one of the things we're going to want is to preserve some of that those rural sight lines. You know, when they were in here talking to us about their concept, we told them they had a couple different ideas. We said, we don't like these ones because it's too much parking. It's too much, it's too horizontal. We'd rather have some of them built up. You know, the advantage of some going to the vertical is that
Have a lot of
it
surface.
leaves a lot more green space. Now, again, you're also trading off on the sight lines, but because of the slope of that land, there is some ability to do that. And so, you know, they took all that into account. They had one of the layouts was really nice looking, and you know, they're going to come back to us with some additional ideas. You know, examples of some other potential benefits, community benefits, would be like right now, you know, Rice Halleck and Eli Fagan merged, and they're kind of busting at the seams in their current place. It's not going to be easy for them to expand. So one of the things we're taking a look at is, in some of the developers in that area, is there an ability for them to build a new Legion Hall, right? That's a community benefit. And so, you know, don't know whether we'll find any takers in that, but that's an example of a community benefit where, you know, where, like I said, that it's a bit different than some of the other stuff we're looking at, but, you know, it's why it's a special use permit, why it's in front of a discretionary board, because it's going to basically take us taking a look at it and say, yeah, this is a real benefit to the community. You know, here's what we're willing to give you.
So what are some of the other areas that are zoned for this incentive?
So again, we had the historic properties, the
multi-use sites, those are all,
multi-use. I don't think there's any in, well, the overlay districts, again, that's already there. And we're seeing some takers of that. Oh, I know one that's in the multi-use. Any of the any district that allows multifamily, there's one that if you provide affordable senior housing, you can get additional density. So as an example, in the multi-use, we have a proposal to potentially add senior housing on the southwest corner of Marketplace Mall, taking advantage of the multi-use redevelopment area overlay. One of the things we approached them and said, you know, if you are willing to commit to a certain amount of affordable housing, you could potentially get some additional units. So they were interested in that. And, you know, I don't know, you know, again, I know you guys are new to this, but you've probably, even having been around for 9 months now, heard it. That's one of the things we hear a lot from residents is, my kids have moved out. I'm an empty nester. I want to sell my home and downsize, but I can't find anything affordable because the developers often want to build the high-end stuff because they get more money for it. And so, you know, if we're going to encourage them to build nice, affordable properties, right? They're potentially making less money by making it the affordable style. So what they can make up for that if they can get a few extra units, right? So instead of 30 units of the high end, they maybe do 20 of the high end, and then they get 20 of the affordable for a total of 40. You know, they got those extra units because they were willing to commit to the affordable. You know, one of the things that we're going to have to work on that one is to understand, and how, that's one of the things we're going to be working with Don, the town attorney, on, is how do we lock that up? Because one of the things I do not want to see is where a developer promises something, builds it,
Never.
and then suddenly the costs go up and they're no longer affordable.
Right.
And so one of the things that we're going to talk into there is what happens if somebody makes that promise and then reneges on that promise.
Mhm.
I don't think you can essentially take those extra units away,
Right.
but I want to build some significant penalties in there for that to happen, so that it strongly discourages anybody from pulling those shenanigans. Because again, one of the things that frustrated the hell out of me, just before I took office, the Rivers Run community, you know, they built that. It was a multi-part senior living complex where you had the independent living apartment complex, and there was supposed to be a second phase assisted living portion, and then further west were all the townhouses, and the apartment building had all the amenities, and the developer went and sold all these townhouses with all those amenities, and people paid a good price for it. And then a year or two later, the developer said, oh, well, I can't make it's not viable as a senior housing, so I'm going to convert it to student housing. It's not that it wasn't viable, it's that you could make more money selling to students. And so not only did he convert it to students, he ripped out almost all the amenities and turned them into yet more student rooms. And so now you had all these townhouses that no longer have the amenities. They're underwater. Their mortgage is higher than what the house is currently valued at, because that townhouse without those amenities. And unfortunately, by that point, there was nothing we could do about it. That I do not ever want to see that repeated in this town again. What really galled me is that developer then came in, and he was one of the ones who wanted to build a senior complex on the corner of East River and Lehigh Station. And my first question to him was, well, if it wasn't viable here, why is it viable half a mile away? And I basically told him the only way I'm ever going to prove that is you go and put those amenities back in the other facility. I didn't care whether the apartments could stay student housing, for all I care, but those townhouses, the senior townhouses, needed the amenities. He instead backed out of building the new senior facility, but he did capitulate and do some other stuff that the residents of River Runs wanted, so that was good. But you know, like I said, one of the things I want to make sure is that this can't happen, or if it does, that there is significant penalties for doing it. To the point where if it happened again at Rivers Run, the town would have the money to essentially buy one of those facilities, one of the empty lots, and build the facilities for the residents and turn it over to the HOA to make up for what the developer did, right? To the point where I suspect the developer, instead of paying the huge penalties, would do that themselves to avoid that issue. You know, that's the kind of dollar amount in terms of penalties I want to see, is that if they pull those shenanigans, that it's enough money that the town is able to rectify the problem that they caused by doing it. So,
All right, so you referenced several different things. There's of course the comprehensive land use plan. Then you mentioned the farmland protection plan, the active transportation plan, and the East River Road corridor study.
Yep.
Can, would it be possible if somebody could just send me the links to all those?
Do we have any extra comprehensive plan books?
I don't know that we do have hard copies. So Becky
Wanna
was
pull a
able to pull
tree,
together the soft copy for me. What I'll do is I'll look at, I don't remember if it was small enough that I think it's small enough that I can email. If it's too big to email, I'll throw it on thumb drives and get you guys thumb drives.
Yeah, that's fine. And, you know, I know that some documents are on the website. So if they're on the website and want to just,
Sure.
you know, and the link is there, that's fine. It's just going through sometimes finding all the documents on the website can be a little bit of a bear.
And then, you know, with that, the thing that when you do something, anytime you update your comprehensive land use plan or anything major like that, you do what's called a GEIS, is it generic environmental impact study. And what they mean by the generic part is, I don't know exactly what's going to go in there. So it's typical thing, you know, I look and say, okay, well, this is a generic commercial building, and this is a generic industrial building, this is generic apartment buildings. And you basically look at it, you're doing your seeker based off of the typical type of thing you would expect to see developed in there. And so then you're looking at that environmental impact study. And that it's a lengthy process after you put this multi-page report together. That's your draft GEIS. You basically hold public hearings. You get a whole bunch of resident feedback. We're there answering questions, providing the feedback. We then have to address each and every question raised, whether it's in public hearings, through emails, however they get the questions to us or issues. We have to address all of them. And then the original draft GEIS plus all of those addressing the concerns is what creates your final GEIS. We then do one last presentation of that, and we then accept it. Obviously, ultimately you will accept it. If you're not happy with where it's at, you continue to modify it till you get to the point where you can accept it. Now, I won't say always, because to go back to the Southwest Quadrant DGIS, one of the first things the new board did, I said, I want to shelve this. I want to kill it. I don't want it to live around. There was some discussion from one of the older board members saying that there was some potential value to it. I didn't agree. I didn't want to see farmland ever be considered the way it was. And so we basically did we essentially voted and said that this project is officially dead. So it will never go on to the final GEIS, never go on to adoption.
Yeah, that whole GIS, it had a negative connotation to it, so it was a good idea to do that.
Yep. And so
are you telling me that there was a GEIS that was done originally that
Nope.
was
So-
severely outdated? Or?
no, so there was a GEIS being done for the Southwest Quadrant. So again, anytime you're doing massive rezoning like that, you have to do a GEIS.
Mhm,
So the previous administration would put together this GEIS
mhm,
where they were rezoning a whole bunch of industrial land in the Southwest Quadrant.
mhm.
And so that one, I don't remember if it was January or February, we basically put forth a resolution to kill it.
Okay.
Stop that one.
That was in part because of the farmland protection.
It-
plan?
We did it before the farmland protection plan was even put in place, but the farmland
Mhm.
protection plan was put in place because of that
Because of that.
Southwest
Gotcha.
Quadrant DGIS.
Mhm.
Now, part of the problem is because of that Southwest Quadrant DGIS, and that's how this town pronounces draft GEIS. Because that Southwest Quadrant DGIS, that whole process itself had a negative connotation. And that's one of the things we fought with when we were doing this comprehensive land use plan. So when we were doing the update, we had to do a new DGIS, and we referred to it as, I think at the time we were calling it the multifamily, but it later expanded to the comprehensive land use update DGIS. And that's one of the things I've made very clear going forward. We'll always have a title in front of it, because you don't want, we were battling, like I said, the negative aspects. and part of the issue was the residents felt it was being ramrodded through. They were ignoring a lot of the complaints, and that there were conflicts of interest involved. Apparently the pronunciation came from Jan. So the, you know, so like I said, the, we went the other way because of that, right? We had multiple public hearings, both at the town hall, and we did them at the schools. We had them in two different, we did one on the east side of town and one on the west side of town. We, you know, opened up to emails and had a whole lot of feedback to make sure that, you know, the issues that plagued that other one weren't present in that one. And so again, what we're doing now is, because that was originally started as part of this comprehensive land use plan, was originally part of the GEIS, but we essentially delayed the completion of that part. We're doing what's known as a supplemental GEIS. It's essentially the same process, but what we're doing is we're adding 2 new sections to that previous GEIS. We're supplementing it, one on incentive zoning and one on solar.
Okay, so so you do have a completed GEIS that was done back in like, what, 2018?
It was done in 2018. It was adopted in very early 2019.
Okay, and then, and now you're doing an updated one, which he discussed at that last meeting.
Correct.
Okay, that makes
And
sense.
so, you know, one of the things we did on the solar, again, the solar was largely done, but we hadn't crafted the local laws. And so again, because we didn't want to delay on it, the amount of local laws that went into it, we just decided to hold off on it. And one of the things we did when we knew there was a project coming in, so we just asked that developer, would you be willing to commit to abiding by the laws we're putting in place, even though they're not in place yet? And they said yes.
Yeah,
If they had said no, then we would have told them, well, we're not going to consider your special use permit until such a time as the new regulations are in place. The great thing about them agreeing to that is they've essentially been the guinea pig for it. And there are things that, as we were going through the process, we said, oh, we need to change how we do that. Oh, the original formula we thought, it's not going to work. And so they've been very flexible with it. Charlie Remaltz has been phenomenal, as have the folks from, well, now it's Delaware River Solar. I don't remember who the company was initially. They'd gotten acquired.
Namaste, I can't remember.
Yeah, Namaste, that's right, Namaste Solar. And so, you know, they've been great in working with us. And, you know, as we've gotten through this, we're still battling through the pilot right now. I just found a clause in the Standard County pilot that basically said the new parcel would be moved to the non-taxable role. That's not what it's supposed to be. If you read real property tax law section, I think it's 427, 428, somewhere thereabouts, it talks about that the parcel itself is taxable, just the improvements from the solar panels are exempt. And so they will still have to pay property tax on the property and any improvements they made to the property that aren't related to the solar panel. All the improvements to the solar arrays are exempt. However, they are negotiating a pilot, so they will be paying a pilot. And we went with the $1,000 per megawatt. It's $1,000 to the county, $1,000 to the town, and $2,000 to the school. Now that's a slightly different just breakdown as you would get under a normal like Comida pilot, except the difference is that there is a annual inspection requirement of the town. We're going to have to do a bunch of work, so that's why our portion went up relative to the county and school district. And so if you basically add a portion of that for our work that we're going to have to do and then do the other breakup by tax rate, it's within $100 of each. And so as part of that, the school district had previously opted out of the pilot program. which basically said that the folks would have to be taxed at their full rate. And we will say, well, why are you doing a pilot? Because if you look at the cost of that infrastructure and you tax at that rate, they'd have to take out a bond. You take the revenue they're getting, subtract out the amount they would have to pay annually in tax years, and it would take 138 years to pay back that bond. Well, needless to say, the equipment isn't going to last for 138 years, so it's not a reasonable thing. So real simple, as I explained to the school district, I was at their their board. If you don't have to agree to this, but just understand that if you don't opt in to the pilot program, to the exemption and the pilot program, then there will not be any solar arrays in town and you won't get any revenue from it. So this particular project is a 5 megawatt project. So again, going back to those numbers, it's $5,000 per year for the town, $5,000 for the county, and $10,000 for the school. In addition to the taxable value of the property itself, which will actually go up because it had previously been farmland. And as you can imagine, if I put a solar array on it, I no longer can get the agricultural exemption that they have been getting. And so the taxable value of the base property goes up as well. So all told, you know, it really makes sense for the taxing authorities to opt into that program, and the school board did as such. So they did it in such a way that they will get a chance to effectively opt into each individual one, so that if there's one that they are not crazy about, they won't opt into it. And that was their right there to do so. The town has taken the approach, if we're really pushing green energy, we're opting in always. Now, with that said, we have special use permit authority. So if there's one that we don't like, it's not whether we don't like it. If it's one that is really problematic, because again, when we approve or disapprove a special use permit, it's not whether we like it or not, it's whether it causes issues, right? So the point is, if there are issues with one, then we have that ability to deny the special use permit. The school board doesn't have that option. So that's why they wanted to maintain the ability to opt in and out for each individual one. So that was essentially their way to quash it. And then their thought being, well, if it doesn't kill it, they'll at least get a whole lot of tax revenue for it. So that's what the solar portion, because we've gone through so much of the solar portion with the remote farm, it's really been tested out. That's why we haven't been discussing it as much, because again, we've been going through it for the past 9 months with that remote project.
Yeah, fortunately, we've been here for the solar portion.
Right.
So that one it was just you know, when the meeting was on for the incentive zoning portion.
Right.
And you said, I think everybody knows Walt. And I'm like, do I know Walt? I don't.
Yeah, I
So-
kind of forgot that part. So Walt Kalina was the consultant. He's from EDR, which is Environmental Data and Research. He's the consultant who was the lead on the comprehensive land use plan update. We also then, when we were doing the local waterfront revitalization plan, I reached out to EDR. At the time, we didn't have in our budget to put together a proposal for a local waterfront revitalization plan, nor did we have the time. So I reached out to Walt and said, would EDR be interested in submitting the proposal? And basically what we did and we said is that if it's successful, then they will be our consultants to do the project. And so we authorized them as a professional service to do that. We were successful in getting the LWRP. It's been on hold due to COVID. We just finally received notification. It sounds like it's going to start moving again. That's certainly what the email indicated to me, but Walt's going to follow up on that in more detail. So like I said, Walt's a great guy. You'll get to meet him once COVID's
Yeah.
you'll meet him virtually. Like I said, he's gonna be a big part of the public presentations for the supplemental GEIS. So,
All right, thank you.
did I miss anything?
No, you did a great job.
Yeah,
Did an awesome
no,
job.
that's very helpful.
Chris, Martin,
I'm able to connect.
if
a
you're
lot of
still
the
on,
dots.
is there anything else that you think I missed?
No, I think you did a very comprehensive discussion on it. As far as hard copies, we really don't have that many, but certainly if anybody does prefer a hard copy as opposed to electronic version, let me know and I can get that for you.
There is one in the library, right? There one in the library?
I thought we put one in the library, but
We
I'm
put
not
one in the
100%
library, too.
positive.
I'm
If
sure
I
it's probably
have a
been
hard
checked out
copy-
numerous times.
I'll see if I've got a hard copy. Anyone's welcome to borrow mine. I'm not a hard copy kind of person. What hard copies do you Well, Chris definitely has one. I think I might have one in a box. I'll look through in case someone prefers hard copy. But yeah, there is, they are online and Becky pulled down a PDF that has all of them together.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah.
Anything else? Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any objection?